session is about the advanced phonics. This goes a little bit like, because I know we get so, usually if you get phonics instruction, it's the simplified letter sound and phonemic awareness piece of it. And then you do have kids that, okay, I got this, now what? And so that's what this session is about. So we're going to look at the 5 principles of English and talk about those and how the language of origin, the advanced letter sound correspondence works, the syllable and morphology, because that is your key to getting kids to be able to break down those bigger words. Okay, so the reading research, a little bit, for those of you who are in here this morning, it is an exact repeat because every training I do doesn't matter because everything that I do is reading. I always start out with these next few slides because everything that we do for reading all goes back to this research. So I will quickly go over those. It goes back to the National Reading Panel in 2000. They had done a research on reading, and they had defined. They come up with five key concepts for literacy instruction, and that successful reading has to have all 5 of those components. Okay, so out of those 5 components, can you all name those? What are the 5 components of reading?
Vocabulary is 1.
Vocabulary is 1. This could be a review for my morning.
Vocabulary.
Let's
say that one.
Oh, that's what Susan said that. What do they have to have? What are some things they have to have? Like
Fluency. Phonemic awareness.
Phonemic awareness. Phonics. And then vocabulary, and then and then fluency, and then the comprehension. Yeah. So having all of those, they need to have all of those in order to have the complete all of reading. And then the simple view of reading, this one, it just shows that you have to have it. It goes into the 5 components again. You have to have the word recognition and the language comprehension in order to have your total reading comprehension. Because if you have kids that can decode, but they don't understand the vocabulary, know those word meanings, they're not going to comprehend it even though they can read it. And then if you have kids that has a rich vocabulary, but they cannot decode, then they're not going to have any reading comprehension. So you have to have both of those to be able to read. Which takes me to the Scarborough's rope of reading, and how it goes back to the 5 components of reading, and it kind of breaks down that simple view of reading. Up here with our language comprehension, that goes into the vocabulary and comprehension piece of the 5 components, and then that is broken down to background knowledge, vocabulary, reasoning skills. All of those things go under language comprehension. Then you have your word recognition, which is your phonemic awareness and phonics. That is the phonological awareness, being able to decode, and then your sight words. Those have to work together in order to build your fluency. And then the practice of the fluency ultimately gets your reading comprehension, which is your ultimate goal. Okay, so with advanced word study, so as we all know, English is such a complex language. It has multiple layers, if you will. And I put this so graphic, it is the earth, but it just, when we look at just our earth where we live, we see what we see, but then when you start looking at it, it's a complex, it has all these different layers that forms that outcome. And that's how reading is. There's so many, it seems to be, if they just know the letters, if they know the 44 sounds or the ABCs and their letter sounds of the 26 letters, then it's not that simple, and we all know that. So if they understand, the more they learn about the structure, they will be able to read independently better. They will be able to process those meanings better. And then they'll be able to understand and remember the spelling. Because when we get into all this morphology and things like that, then some of the spelling is actually going to make sense. Therefore, of course, we know basic phonics is not a issue. So, okay, so we're going to get into the 5 principles of English. And this is really wordy, but we're going to break it down. The reason, and I left it wordy because I literally just copied it word for word what the 5 principles of English are. But when we really look at it, let's look what they mean, it'll make more sense. So the first one is language of origin. And of course, that's just where do our words come from? Because the English language, we have gotten influences from so many different languages to form our language. So where those words originated from, it plays an important role into how we pronounce it and how we spell it. And the second one, the phoneme-grapheme correspondence, that's letter sound association, that's phonics. The third one is the position of the phoneme or grapheme in a word, so that would be if it's in the initial, the medial, or the final position. That would determine how a letter is, how it sounds. The next one, the arbitrary orthographic conventions for letter sequences. So that just means like, we have a convention spelling system for our language of English. And it seems, and there have been scribes and dictionary writers that have made decisions of how we want to spell certain things. And most make sense. But there are all exceptions to the rule that just, they're just kind of random rules. And that's one of the principles. And then lastly would be your morphology and the parts of speech. So we're going to break those down a little bit and get into those. 2 and 3, that's covered in your basic phonics. So we're not going to talk about 2 and 3 today. We're going to talk about those 3. And that will help you get into breaking down those multisyllabic words. Okay, so the first one is the language of origin. So you guys have a handout. And it has, let's see. It's table 4.1, the characteristics of the English words. So our language is broken down basically to the Anglo-Saxon, the French, Latin, and Greek. So just kind of look at that chart and look at the features of each of those languages, what it represents, and then it gives you some example words on those. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two just to kind of really look at those, and then you can start making some like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So, what are some things that you noticed about, let's just take the first one at first, the Anglo-Saxon. What are some things that you noticed about those type of words?
They're just like nouns.
They're very common.
Well, verbs too, but they're just words we say all the time.
Most of them are
One syllable.
You might have a few that's got 2 syllables in there. 1 to 2 syllable words. Yeah, so they're very common. A lot of them, they're kind of like practical words. And then compare it to the French. What'd you notice about the French words?
They don't have a lot of what would we consider like phonemic awareness. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. That isn't what a child sounding this out would think that would say.
They don't
If they
follow
only
the
knew,
rules.
they don't follow the rules.
Yes. And it brings it's a higher level vocabulary too.
Yeah.
And then the Latin. What y'all notice about the Latin?
It's content words.
Good observation on that.
Yeah, a lot of them have the same prefixes. Latin same prefixes and are over and over again for different things.
They're more than one syllable.
Yeah, they're getting longer too, aren't they? And then the last one, what's one of the key things that there was one thing that kind of stuck out to me for Greek, but what did you all notice for the Greek words? Like, they have a few, but biology, chlorophyll, physical. What kind of words are those? Yeah, they're science, mathematical, they're more technical terms. And so it's, like this right here was kind of really interesting to me. So for a long time, the first few years of teaching, I mean, you've always heard it's like when you did spelling bees, like you tell the students like, oh, you can ask for the language of origin, and I'm like, what is that? Big book. Who? But I mean, it is a big book. But but it's just really interesting how it all plays a role into it. The other page, the 4.2 and 4.3, we won't really go into that, but I wanted you to have this because it kind of gives examples of the sound symbol correspondence, and that way if you're looking at church and that's more of a common practical word, then it's going to say the ch sound versus it being kirch or church. Because if people, and that goes back to vocabulary and background knowledge, if a kid never seen or know what that word is, then that would help kind of determine. And then it talks about the grade levels of when those are introduced on that one. That's just for you guys to have. So we're going to do just a little quick fun, or I think it's fun, activity. So get this paper right here, and I'm going to give you all some words, and you all put at the top in the yellow box, put whether you think that it's going to be an Anglo-Saxon, Latin, or a Greek word. And we'll just do a few. So my first word is going to be traction. Traction. What kind of word do you think that it would come from? And I will go kind of quickly just so we don't run out of time again. But I will slow down if y'all need me to. Just let me know, okay? The next word I have is earthquake. Earthquake. Which now that I say it out loud, that one could be tricky. And I do apologize, I didn't mean for them to be. My next word is geology. Geology. What about extractable? Extractable. And earthworms. And one more, we will do biographic. Okay, who wants to share what words they put under the Anglo-Saxon? Or did you have any under Anglo-Saxon?
I didn't have any.
Okay.
I put earthworm.
I put earthquake and earthquake.
And I put both of them.
Earthworm and what's the other one?
Earthquake.
That is correct. And that's what I said, the earthquake, I could, like after I said it, I was like, oh, that could be under because it's kind of a science term.
Yeah,
That's what I did. I fell in agreement.
That was not a good word
Yeah.
choice on my part because that I could see that definitely, but I could definitely see why you would put that one. But it is an Anglo-Saxon because worms and earth, and then you can those are two simple words that they combine for a compound word. So those earthquake and earthworms are an Anglo-Saxon. Okay, what'd you all put for Latin?
Put extractable and traction.
I put both of those.
Good job, guys. And so then the last one will be what?
Geology and biographic.
Y'all are good. Yep, you're exactly right.
I still had.
So just, just common or general characteristics about each of those, like we said with the Anglo-Saxon, they're workers, it's common words, practical, things like that. With the French, it's a lot of, it's around food and shopping and those type of words would be the French. And then in the Latin, it's what you would see a lot in literature, and you have a lot of that. They use the morphology a lot in those, they have the prefixes and stuff like that. And then of course, Greek is mostly science and math terms. So just broadly speaking, it would help you kind of categorize those into those languages. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next one, which is the arbitrary orthographic conventions, and which is our key point of the advanced timing, graphing, correspondence, or we call PGC. I say PCG all the time, and it's PGC. It is PGC. Oh, yeah. PC, yeah. Graphing, phoneme, graphing, correspondence. Okay. Now, and something I think one of y'all had mentioned too is like it seemed like it's randomness in the spelling. And one thing I wanted to point out is that when we go into this, because how many times, or if you've ever heard, I heard it as a student and I was guilty of it as an early teacher. Have you heard something to the fact of, well, these are words that don't really follow the rules. There's really no rhyme or reason. You just have to memorize it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just want to go back to every student I've said that to and apologize. But those early students you've had when you first start, you're like, oh. But anyway, now, like I said, there are some, but there's not as many as we think there are. Because once you get into knowing these principles, when we get done, you'll realize out of all of the words in our language, there's only about 300 to 500 that are random. And, that's not very many, thinking about all the words that we have in our language. We just have to know them. And if we don't know them, we don't know to teach our kids. So we think it's random. So the first rule that we're going to talk about is the hard and soft C and G. There is a rule for that, that you can help determine if you're going to use the S or the K, okay? Now, if the C is, actually it's the same rule for both. If the C or the G is followed by an E, I, or Y, it's the soft sound. And which is for C, and the soft G is J. And then if it's A, O, or U, it's the hard sound, which is K or G. And I'm going to show you a trick that will that would help your kids remember that. It's called the CAT rule. Have y'all heard of the CAT rule before? Good.
But I taught for years before I even was exposed to the CAT rule, and I could have been teaching that all along. Crazy.
Ain't it so sad, when you learn something, you're like, man. So, and you can do this on a poster chart and leave it up in your room. So you have your C, okay, the letter C, and you can draw some little ears if you want. So it's the CAT rule. If you want to, you can label it. Okay, then you're going to draw your cat's eyes. So your cat's eyes are A's, and the nose is an O, and then the mouth is a U. And then you can just kind of, do, if you want to draw the around like that. So that is your CAT rule, so that they can help it. If it's those letters, it's going to make the K as in cat. And then they carry that over with the G, just like, well, it's the same way for G. There's now, in G, so those 300 to 500 rules that are words a lot of them is that G rule, because generally speaking it does, but a lot of times there are some words that don't follow, like girl. It's followed by an I, but it's that hard controlled vowel. So it goes into a whole other thing. Okay, your next one is the CH and the TCH pattern. Okay, you guys have a worksheet. This one right here, and this one, it's so get this one. So just look at the words up there. Some of them are spelled the CH at the end, and some of them have the TCH. Just go ahead and categorize those words and put the CH words together and put the TCH words together. And this activity is called a word sort, and this is good to do with your kids too. Once you have them separated, see if you can see a pattern of when they put a T in it and when they don't. And if
After a
you,
vowel. After a vowel.
what kind of vowel? Because in the word speech,
Long, I think, maybe. No, short.
There's something wrong. Let's see.
let's see, read, can I get a volunteer to read the TCH word? Just read them down real fast.
Retch, clutch, pitch, fetch, botch, match.
Okay, now somebody read the CH words. The one-
Speech, launch, porch, winch, couch, welch, filch, branch, smooch, belch, starch, gulch, bench.
Okay, now, when she read the TCHs, what did you hear? Did you hear something that, was it kind of a pattern? Did they sound the same or did they sound different? Huh?
There's a lot that if they go together, they rhyme. There's a lot of times there's
Okay, so if they
Ranch.
rhyme, what does rhyme mean? They sound the
Same.
same.
Yeah.
Okay, when she read these words, was there any
No.
pattern? It was all over the place. So and it sounded the same because had the short vowel sound.
Yeah.
So if it has a short vowel sound, they put a TCH. So that's your so the number 2 questions, when should the ch phoneme be spelled as a TCH? And that's when it would be followed by a short vowel sound. So because when you read those ones with just a CH, you had R control vowels, you had long vowel sounds. They were all over the place, but a short vowel sound is TCH. Okay. So that would be another rule for your kids. And then our next one is the GE and DGE. When you're spelling a word. Okay. So if I write this word right here, what does that spell? D-O-G-E. What does that say? If you were to pronounce, sound it out, what does it say?
Doge.
Doge.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So if I do this, what's that word?
Dog.
Okay. What if I wrote what's that word?
Beige.
Beige. Because we've learned, that it's the silent E rule.
Yeah.
Vowel, consonant, vowel. E's making the O say its name, and here E's making this vowel say its name. So then what if I do this? So, just adding that D. Now, can you put your thinking caps on, and can you think of a word in our language that, because what sound, both of these make the J sound, which is the letter J, it's a single sound. Can you all give me a word that ends when you write it in the letter J? Can you all think of a word that ends in J? You know why? Because there are 0 words in the English language that end in J. And that kind of goes back to this arbitrary convention. The scribes and the dictionary writers, when they were starting to write our spelling conventions, they thought that if they ended, if you were writing and you put a J at the end, they thought it might get confused with the letter L. So they said, we're not going to do that, because they might not be able to tell if it's a letter J or a letter L. That's what they thought. So we're going to do this. Change it to a GE. Well, then they said, well, if we did GE, then people are going to use this rule and mispronounce the word that we want them to know. So they decided that they are going to put this consonant of D, and it protects that short vowel sound. So if you have a word that has the short vowel sound and ends in the J sound, it's going to be DGE, because they put that D in there to protect this, to keep it short. Because when you put that extra consonant, the E, it can't skip 2 consonants over to move the vowel. Have I blown anybody's mind yet?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm just trying to figure out why they would think a J would be an L.
I know, and I think, well, it goes back to, think about the print, the writing styles, Old English.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. Because when you think, because like, a lot of the Old English is what ends up being confusing for us now when you go back and think about it. I have to show this because it's relevant. My son had to quote, I didn't think I'd ever forget it, but it was a poem for his senior year. And it was, in his Google Classroom, whatever, he pulled it up. And I was like, Kate, honey, it was in Old English, which I don't know, it was Kim Sargent that works here, her husband was the teacher. But knowing him, I didn't think anything about it, because I was like, okay, he wants it. So it was some of those words, like, I had to look at them really. It's like, okay, how do you pronounce this? What does this even mean? And so he went through, and some of the words, he was like, just really he could recite it, but he didn't know what some of them were, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, he did it. And then when he went and had to recite it to the teacher, then going back to our dialect, he's more country than I am. And Mr. Sargent, he said, well, first of all, why did you do the Old English version? He said, well, I thought that's what y'all had me to do. He said, no. He said, modern English was fine. And it was like completely different sounding. And then he said, and you butchered it to death with the pronunciation, but I want to give you credit because it's accurate. But, that Old English, it about killed us. And, it was so difficult. But I think that's why. Because the letter formation of Old English was so different to now. But, whew. So D is used to keep that vowel sound short on that one. Okay, so then our next one is phoneme, grapheme, mapping. And this is it goes a lot it's an advanced version of Elcano boxes for your basic. And so this is a grid here that I gave you that you can use. And this is one, of course, depending on the level of your students, you might need to break this apart and not give them the whole page. It might overwhelm them, but you might have some students that can do that. So what you do is and it's the sound, like each box is for the sound that it makes. So for example, if we used the word, let's just use like dodge, for example. Okay, so how many sounds did you hear in the word dodge? Three sounds. So when you are doing this mapping grid for dodge, you're going to use 3 boxes because these are sound boxes. You stress that to your kids. These are sound boxes. I don't even know if I would use the word Oconum boxes with them. I would just call them sound boxes the whole time. So then you're going to put each letter or the representation of each sound in a box. So for example, the first sound that you hear, what's the first sound that you hear in dodge? Okay, so then you're going to put your D. And the second sound that you hear in dodge is ah. Okay, now our last sound is what? J. So how is that represented in the word dodge? Now we've already learned, boys and girls, that no word will ever end in J. Never, ever, ever, ever. When you're writing or spelling, you will never end a word in J, no matter what. And we also learned that we use the letters, we have 2 different ways of doing that. So they said that GE is going to make the J sound for the end of the word. But sometimes if we need this to say a short vowel sound, which this one does, we have to add the letter. You all remember what letter we talked about? So what letter do we need to add? We need to add the D that protects that short vowel. So this is a short vowel. So for the J sound, what letters represent the J sound in dodge?
D, G, E.
D, G, and E. And that's all going to go in the same box because that represents that one sound. And then after you do that, then this long box over here, you have them write the word all together because then they're looking at it and they see that's my letter sound association in the boxes. And then I'm going to come over here and then I'm going to write the word dodge. And then they can see how it comes together. And then, like when you're doing that with your students, like when you're modeling and going through that guided practice, you break it down like that, word, sound for sound, letter for letter, word for word. Okay, so and then you go through and do several of those. So that's how you practice. And then, this can be with any, I just use dodge as an example, but that's with any word that you want to do. That's how you do those. Okay, now, we have 6 syllable types. And so what is a syllable? Who can tell me what a syllable is?
Close word. Funerals, it has to contain a vowel.
Okay. Yep, it does.
Same.
Yeah, that is the key.
Same.
Now,
Between.
and let's specify vowel sound. And that's what we want to try to, like when we're talking to kids, focus on the verbiage of saying sounds, because when seahorse, is E is the sound, but it's EA. So vowel sound. So a syllable is the organized sound around the vowel. Okay, so here are our 6 syllable types. And we're going to talk about each of those. And I think on your handout it has those listed for you. Table 4.6, it has all the syllables listed. And then there's an odd one, and we're going to talk about that too. And it gives you some examples of some of those syllables and then the definition. So you guys will have those. In that resource folder that it's on that placemat, all of these handouts will be in there as well that you guys can print off and use and whatever. And a copy of this will be in there for you to go back. So when we talk about these, and the big one with the closed is, let me see what's next. I can't. Okay, yeah. So when you see that they're broken apart here, that, you know, what it is. So like the one key feature with it closed is that when it is, your vowel sound is short because it's closed, the vowel is closed between two consonants. And since each syllable has a vowel sound, that's how you focus on dividing those up and determining what kind it is. And then you, like I said, you can go down and look at those. The next one is that the silent E rule. The open one is, you know, if when the vowel's at the end, it always makes a long sound. And then, like I said, I'm just gonna let you read through, like, you just had these. So for time's sake, I'm gonna move on because you guys can read those and take from them just as well as me standing here and talking about them. But I do want to, this little trick I did about the odd, that I learned about the odd syllables, and those are ones that are, because most of the time syllables are stressed, or like, but then you have some of those that's got that schwa in them, like again, things like that. Then it's hard to determine where it would fall. Those are your odd ones. But a little trick, and I thought this was so cool, that you can determine how to separate them, is to say any word like you're calling your dog. Have anybody ever heard that before? Like, I just learned that recently, and I thought it was so cool. Like, for example, wagon. So if you're going out and you're calling your dog and you go, wagon. So it naturally breaks it apart. Mm-hmm. And so you have, and when you say wagon, the gun is not as stressed as wag. So what you stress and call out the longest and the loudest is your stressed syllable, and then the other part is the unstressed, which is the schwa. And that's how you could separate that one. So let's try the word captain, and let's say captain like you were calling the dog. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Captain. And if you think of, like, if you all have an animal or a hat or something, think of like how you would call, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what you do when you call for.
I'm gonna put that on here. Call the dog.
Yes. Yes.
Odd schwa syllable. Call the dog. The kids would love that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, they'll get it that
And
way.
then when you get them and it have them, it's like, especially if you have a small group, you're like, oh, Susan, do you have a dog? What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Wally.
Raleigh? Wally? Okay, guys, let's practice, because I would practice with actually their dog's names first. It's like, okay, guys, let's practice Wally. Let's call Wally. It's time for Wally to eat. Are you ready? Wally. They would love it. Mm-hmm. And then go into actual words.
Right. They would love it.
Okay, so now that you know all of those little rules, then you have to divide the words by syllables. And what this does is when you have students that are presented with these multisyllabic words, you don't want them to immediately shut down. I've seen a kid, you hand them a sheet of paper, and if a word is longer than 5 letters, they shut down, they can't read it. Mm-hmm. So if they can do this strategy, if they know that they can see this word, break it down, and because when they break it down, then they're going to realize they can read that, and it goes back to blending, which goes all the way back to their phonemic awareness skill that they have to be able to blend and segment. So that skill carries them all the way through life, really, because I still use it for words sometimes that I don't know. But you have 3 basic principles for dividing the words. The first one is this one, between the consonants and the 2 vowels. So if you have a vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, if there's 2 consonants, you just split them down the middle. That one's most common. And there's some examples here like sublet, napkin. Then you can see it's vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, split the consonants. So that's the first one. The second one is if you have 1 consonant between 2 vowels. So like, and this is where a lot of your open syllables come in, like an even and rabies, and which we learned about our open syllables. They have the long vowel sound at the end of those. Now, with this one, it says, it could either be the V slash CV or VC slash V. Now, the first one, always have them try the first one first, because that will work 75% of the time. Now, for the other 25%, what you do is, okay, let's just take this word right here. So when you're teaching this to your kids and you teach them this rule and you say, so you've done a few at the top, like even and rabies, okay? Because they go over, they find the first vowel, split it, and it works. Okay, so then you give them this word, and you tell them, okay, always try that first. All right, so here's my first vowel. I'm going to split it, and I know my rule. If it's an open syllable, this is going to say the long vowel sound. So if I split it here, this word is going to be ever. Ever. Does that even sound right? That doesn't make sense. That word doesn't make sense to me. Well, my teacher says that if that doesn't make sense, then I can try and split it after the first consonant. So let me try that. Okay, so if I do that with the consonant at the end, that closes that syllable. So now this is a short vowel sound. So this is going to say ev. And this is one of my R control sounds, and this is going to say So I have ever. Okay, ever. I've heard of that word before, so I'm going to do that. So this is 25% of the time. The bottom one is 25% of the time, and that's why you want to let them try that. But have them do, that. And when you're teaching that to your kids, do that think aloud like that. So, and then if you did river, it'd be the same thing. So like. Okay, so my rule is after the first vowel. Okay, that makes it open. So this word is river. That doesn't really sound right. Let me try that again. And I'm going to try to split it after the consonant instead of that first vowel. Now that makes it closed, which would make that riv and river. River. Okay, yeah, that word is river. And then the last one is when you have your consonant blends and digraphs, they stay together. And then I love this little quote right here, letters that work together stick together. You cannot divide them. And that and it's these those three types of letter sounds combinations. And so, in like this one right here, going back to this rule, if they weren't real sure what that word is, okay, and if they were, and that they were contemplating, which it goes back, this is 75% of the time, so they probably should do that anyway. But if they're still if they can't remember that, then if they do remember, you have them look at the word first. Like if you're teaching this to your kids, then you look at it and say, okay, do you see any, and you can do this with every word that you do you see any letters in that word that are working together to form a sound? The T, yes. So this TH right here, those work together. That's one of our digraphs. So we can't split that one because they work together, they got to stick together. So if this has to stay together, then where are we going to have to split our word? And then, then you can show that. So just have those, when you talk them through that, just have those conversations with them about those. Any questions or comments so far about that? Okay, and then the last one. So, a morpheme. So what is a morpheme? When we hear that term, what does it mean? Okay, so a morpheme is the smallest meaningful part of a word. So like we have syllables we can break a word up into syllables, but some of these words or some of these word parts of syllables have no meaning by themselves. With a morpheme, that chunk of letters that form a part of a word, it's going to have a meaning. So the smallest of those is a morpheme, and those are commonly prefix, suffix, and root words. Okay? Now, your morphology is directly related with the language of origin because, I mean, that's how important that it is. And it's so cool. Like, I geek out on this. Morphology is probably like my favorite because it's like a puzzle to me. So we're going to look at this word map and stuff that you guys have. So this activity, and then I printed these out for you guys just to have the most commonly things. It's got a bunch of them and they are common. What I don't like about this, but I just couldn't find anything else, is it doesn't separate it into prefixes, roots, or suffixes. So, and I had actually another printout, but then it was from John O'Connor, but then I realized like there was a mistake in like the alignment, like it gave examples, like say for example the prefix was trans and then the word examples was like biology. I mean, you know, so there was just a mix up in the layout of the document, so I quit using it because it's not accurate. And I've not found anything to replace it yet, so I did give you these for you guys, but I would suggest if you're giving it to the students to have them separated for them. And especially when you're doing the morphology work with the students, just go ahead and give them because, I mean, there's so many of them and, I mean, and there's common ones and just, that's not something, I mean, eventually if they keep using it and stuff that, you know, but just have that little, the chart there and that way they won't know. Okay, so some of our prefixes that we have, so trans, dis, miss, and re. So you know, re is two letters, but it does have a meaning. What does re mean? Again. It means again. So if we do redo, what does that mean? We're going to do it again. And then so, you know, all of it. So miss, you know, miss means like not or wrong. So you can do all of these. So let's go ahead and look at all of these. Your suffixes are, you have different ones. You have some that don't change the meaning of a word. They just change, like that's the present tense and the past tense. But then you have some suffixes that change the parts of speech, which comes into the other part of the principle number 5. And it can be if it changes it to an adjective or adverb, things like that. So if we were, so now, just for this activity, this is one of my all-time favorites, and if when I do vocabulary, I do this as well, because what this does is it not only, I mean, it allows the student to see the different parts of the word, so when they break it apart, they can sound them out, because look at these right here, they're all decodable. So if they have this big word, like, we'll just say what, transformed, you know, if that's one whole word, that's a huge word for a kid. But if they understand prefixes, roots, and suffixes, they can break that up and they say, okay, I can do, and you know, they can decode each one and then blend it together. And then once they realize that they've read a big, huge word, I mean, it's just so, I mean, they liberating for them. They just get so excited. So we're going to go through this just real quick. I think, yeah, we'll have time to do that. Because I want to talk you through this of how you would do it with your kids in that way. And then also, like, it helps with prediction at the bottom. So we'll go ahead and do one. So let's do, we'll let's just do the word invisible. Okay, so I'm gonna write, now if I was, that I'm like old school, you could either write, like do your overhead projector on a sheet of paper, or if you wanted to draw this map up, just somehow so your students can see this for you to model it. So let's write the word invisible in the top box. Okay, everybody got the word invisible? Okay, so what is the word, guys?
Invisible.
Invisible. Good job. So now let's look at that. That is a big long word for us, but I bet we can break it down. Do we see any prefixes in there? Word parts at the beginning of the word? So if you're not real sure, you can look at the chart that I gave you, and if you see those on your chart, you can show, that will help you with the answer. So what would be our prefix in this word? In. Okay, so let's write the word in the prefix box. In that first box, we're gonna write the prefix in. Okay, and sometimes if they are struggling with it, like if it ends in an S or an S, something like that, you can start with a suffix. You don't have to go in order. Or you can just ask them, say, okay, when you look at this word invisible, are there any parts of this word that you know that can be broken apart? And they may just, suffixes are usually the easiest, so that if they do that, say, okay, perfect. So if somebody comes up and says, the next word part that I see is probably the ending of ibble or bull. Okay? And then when they say that, say, okay, that is a word part. So is that going to go in our root box, or would that be in our suffix box? And then they're going to say suffix, and then say, okay, so let's write IBLE. That is our suffix. So everybody write that in your suffix box. Okay, so now we have our word prefix, our prefix of IN, and then our IBLE is a suffix. So what's left of that word? Viz. And that is VIS. And that's going to be our root word. Okay, so now looking at your chart that I gave you, let's look at what each of these word parts mean. So with the prefix IN, who can tell me what IN means?
Not.
Okay, so let's write not in that first box. Okay, what about viz? Who can tell me what viz means?
See.
Okay, so let's just write the word see in the middle box. So everybody write this one. Okay, and then what about our suffix of IBLE? What does IBLE mean?
Capable.
Okay, good job. So we're going to write able to in the last box. So now we have the definitions of all of our word parts, which are morphemes. And when you're talking that to your kids, I would just kind of, just throw that vocabulary in there interchangeably so that they pick up on that morphemes is the prefixes and things. Okay, so now guys, if you looked at all these word parts that forms one word, we have not, see, and able to. So think about that, and I want you to predict what you think this word invisible means by just looking at these meaningful parts of the word. Write your definition in that box. So I'll give you just a minute to think of what you think the definition of invisible would be. Okay. Who wants to share what they have written for their definition?
Not able to see.
Not able to see. okay? You literally just rearranged the words that was in the box. I mean, yeah, not able to see. Okay, does anybody have anything different? Okay, so we have come up with knowing what those parts are, that it's invisible probably is not able to see. So I want to check it. So I've pulled up the word invisible with my Merriam-Webster app. And this is, and I'm going to read you the dictionary definition, which is why we don't let kids look up dictionary definitions, okay? The first definition says, incapable by nature of being seen, not perceptible by vision. If they don't know what invisible means, they're not going to know what those words are. They can make sense of that. That's why we have to give them student-friendly definitions, and because not being able to see means the same thing as what they just said. But what you do is, and then B, it says inaccessible to view, and then you can talk, and then that goes into another word part, things like that. But and then D says not able to be recognized or identified. So so that's how you can kind of check it. But that's the dictionary definitions for students. They just cannot.
Me and her actually co-taught together. She was a classroom teacher, and we would put up the vocabulary words, and we would make them turn to each other, talk about what they thought it meant, write it down what they thought it meant before looking it up. We did that all the time with our vocabulary.
That's awesome.
So that way they already had it in their mind.
Yes, and if they go through this process and come up with their own, they can relate
Put
it.
that together.
Yes, and they will remember it. And when I do the vocabulary, because I'm getting a little bit off topic, but the Freyer model, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, it is like, and that it does that. It's like you take the word, you do an example, non-examples, you break it apart like this, you have them, they draw a picture, and they love that, because what does that word mean to you? What does, like, say invisible? Okay, if I'm a kid and I'm thinking, okay, invisible, what can I draw that's going to help me remember what that word is? Somebody's going to have different answers. Somebody might have
draw anything.
yeah, you can see it. You're exactly right. Somebody, they might try to draw. I mean, it is hard to draw, but like, the invisible cloak from Harry Potter. Some of them, which a lot of my kids like to wrestling, they would draw John Cena. You can't see me, So it's whatever. But whatever they relate, they can remember. So, like, if I use the example, the Harry Potter cloak, and I have Susan that's never watched Harry Potter, she has no reference for that. But Susan watches WWF every Saturday night. So that's why when they draw their own, then they are going to have that own mental or that own image for them.
Yeah.
So I got a little bit, but I love that Freyer model. And I mean, you could just Google it. There's a gazillion graphic organizers for that, but that is the #1 strategy for vocabulary. Okay. See, I get excited and I start running out of time. Okay, so I'm going to recap, but I do have a couple minutes, and I'm going to show you one activity that you can do with the syllable types for your kids. And we may or may not have time for you guys to actually do it, but I'm going to let you take the materials with you so you can do it with your kids. But, so just to recap what we talked about today, we went through the 5 principles of English that goes with that. We did the language of origin, we talked about that. 2 and 3 is covered in basic phonics. We talked about the orthographic conventions, and then we talked about our morphology today. Do you have any, that was a lot of information. We had, I think, maybe some aha moments. Any comments, ideas, or questions that you would have at this point?
I enjoyed it. It was very good.
Yeah, good. We do, like I said, I do want to show you this activity, but I want to say this too. that's my contact information. If you have any questions about anything to do with literacy, just don't hesitate to email me. This is a feedback. You can do one for the whole day, or you can do it individual sessions. It's totally up to you. If you wouldn't care to do individual sessions, that would be more beneficial for us, because sometimes they'll say like, something about the summer conference, and if they say, and we don't know if, well, was it me or was it somebody else, or something like that. So that would be greatly helpful for us and appreciated. Okay, one last thing, sealable tops. So with this one is a folder, and what I'll do, I'll talk about it, and then you can just pick it up on your way out. And all you need is a folder and some Post-it notes. If you want to grab enough for just a small group, I have enough folders here for you guys to get, 4 or 5, something like that. Okay, so what you do is you take Post-it notes and you have them write each of the sealable tops, and take it, and it's just a folder, and you have them write it and stick it at the top. Okay, that's it.
Can I take a picture of that?
You can. I'm gonna lay it down. I don't want to be.
Yeah.
You should be paying that.
And then you're gonna hand your students a handful of Post-its. Okay. Actually, let's see. It will hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 3, 18. You can get 18 words in here. Okay. So what you're gonna do then is on each Post-it, you're going to give them a word, and they're going to write the word. Now, if the kids are to the point that they can't spell, you can just pop it up on the board. If you can write a word, and that way too. Either way, depending on the level of your student. So you're going to give them the word hat. 1 word per Post-it. Okay, and then as they write the word, then they're going to put the Post-it under whichever syllable type it is. Okay, and then so you can do it a couple different ways. Like I said, probably with our kids, you'd probably have to display it, because it doesn't matter if they can spell it correctly, because the purpose of this activity is for them to identify the syllable type so that they know how to pronounce the words. Okay, so once you do all that and you give them the words, and then they stick it, and then this is what it's going to look like at the end. So each time that you give them a word, then they're going to put it, where it needs to be, but that's what it'll look like. And then and then you show, when you talk about it, point out that those little bitty words, with that open end, even though it's a little word, it's at the end. And so that's going to say the long sound. And so, I know when I was taught these words too, it was like, oh, there's no rhyme or reason. You just got to know that says W-E and it says we. No, that's not right, because it's an open syllable. So, but this is a cute little activity, and I'll leave that there if you guys want to use that.